Hello, my name's David Reekie, and I'm a local historian and the chair of Canterbury Ramblers. I live in Fulwich, which is a very historic town which is on the far eastern side of the old park, and the old park is one of my favourite places to go walking. I've walked here for many, many years, and I also lead groups here from the Canterbury Ramblers and also for the Canterbury Festival and for my own historical walking group. And whenever I bring people up into the old park, they're always blown away by how wonderful it is and how they didn't know that it was right on their doorstep. And they're really extraordinarily taken by the fact, the contrast between the deep woodland of the western side and the open heathland of the eastern side. And it's just wonderful when you break out of the woodland and you see the gorse and the wonderful views over the Stour Valley. So it really is a remarkable place. So there's a number of good walking routes through the old park, which are public rights of way, and also a number of informal walking routes, which I've used for many years. And the great thing is that it's open to the public, at least for the time being. And I'm very concerned that it remains open to the public and it stays a place of recreation and enjoyment, and also for nature. And my main interest really is in the historical importance of this site. So I really just want to say a few words really about the history of this amazing place, because it is one of the most unique historical landscapes in the entire country, I believe. And I think it's virtually unknown. So this is a treasure that we have to look after. The history goes back 700,000 years now. Isn't that astonishing? Nearly 750,000 years. It goes back to the Old Stone Age. And where I live in Fulwich, in the 1930s, they discovered some hand axes in the quarry, the gravel pits there. They were discovered by a group of local doctors, amateur archaeologists, and these were identified as being part of a very ancient group of hominids. They weren't Homo sapiens, they were Homo heidelbergensis. And these were hunter-gatherers who would have come over from Europe on the land bridge, and they would have gathered food. They also hunted big game as well. Now, this was an interglacial period, which was warmer than the glacial times, and they would have had big game to hunt. They would have hunted rhino, hippopotamus, and possibly even elephants. We know that in Swanscombe they discovered the remains of butchered elephant bones, which were hunted by these people. So they were remarkable. They probably had fire. They may have had some basic clothing, but they managed to survive even during a fairly cold period. So quite extraordinary people. I think I have great admiration for them, and they lived on the hills here. The history also dates back to the Middle Ages. It's one of the most important sites, with St Martin's Church on the far eastern boundary of the old park. This was, of course, the site of the great Christianisation of England in 597 AD, with the monk who was St Augustine, who was sent over by Pope Gregory the Great from Rome. And he came here to convert the pagan English under King Ethelbert. Now, Ethelbert married a Christian princess called Bertha. She came from Francia, that is where we now known as France. And she brought Christianity with her, and I think she persuaded Ethelbert to allow the mission from Rome to come and convert them to Roman Catholicism. And this happened in 597 AD. They set up base in St Martin's Church, which was the oldest continuously used place of Christian worship in the entire country, and is still used, of course. Wonderful place to visit. And then, of course, Ethelbert was baptised, and the great cathedral was built as well within the city walls. So that's one extraordinary episode, just one extraordinary episode of this place. Later on, it became important as a hunting park. It was created for Henry VIII. Now, he created it as a place where he could enjoy himself during his honeymoon with his fourth wife, Anne of Cleves, who was brought over from Flanders. And Henry had this, he was quite an old romantic really at heart. He just wanted nothing more than a happy marriage, and hoping his new wife would bear him a son. But sadly, of course, we know the marriage didn't work out, and his hopes came to nothing. But he did create this area as a hunting park, which is why it's called the Old Park. There were other hunting parks here as well. There was Bishop Odo had one in Trenley Park Woods, and also the Abbot of St Augustine's had one on the site of St Martin's Hospital. So the whole area was really used for hunting in the Middle Ages. Later on, it became an important area for military training. It was during the Napoleonic Wars in 1797 that they set up a large barracks in Canterbury. It was all along the Surrey Road, extending about half a mile. They had artillery barracks, they had infantry barracks, they had cavalry barracks, and they used to exercise here on the old park. So this was a very important place for military exercises, and the areas remained in use by the military right up until very recently, about 15 years ago, when the Howe barracks closed. But had been continuously used by the military, and it became extremely important during, first of all, the First World War. They trained on the golf course. That military, if you look on the golf course, you can still see First World War trenches, which they built for practice trenches to train men before they went out to fight and perhaps die in the fields of France. And you can still see the outlines of these trenches. Later on in the Second World War, the Howe Barracks was built in 1938, which was just before, in the run-up to the Second World War. I think the government knew that a war was coming, so this was part of the preparations. And after 1940, of course, the disaster in France, the British and French armies were defeated in northern France by the Germans. They were driven back to the coast. We managed to get back about 320,000 soldiers from Dunkirk. And the country was at risk of invasion. We know that Hitler was planning Operation Sea Lion to invade the country. Churchill was determined to resist. He knew that the odds were against him, but he trained himself to shoot a pistol for his own defence, and he ordered his wife and girlfriend, his wife and daughter, to, if the Germans came for them, to grab a kitchen knife and take one of the blighters with them. So he was determined to resist, and he declared Canterbury to be a fortress area. The defence of Britain was organised along an outer crust along the coast. This was designed to slow the invasion and then stop lines across the countryside, but there were also strong points called fortresses, and Canterbury was designated as one of them. And if you can see behind me, you can see some of the last remains of the Canterbury Fortress, which are these wonderful trenches here, which are all over the woods. There's about 4 or 5 of these systems of trenches. This one's about 80 metres long. It's probably the best preserved one, but you can see others from the cycle track as well. And it's remarkable survival, really, from this time. Now, why was Canterbury designated as Fortress Point? Well, the idea was to break up any advance, to slow down the attack, and then give enough time for the Royal Navy to sweep down from the north, down the North Sea, and cut off the communication lines across the Channel. And this was actually a very good plan. And if you slowed up the advance long enough, then you could counterattack along the line of the North Downs, and it's thought that this plan would have worked extremely well. Fortunately, it never came to pass because the RAF won the Battle of Britain and the invasion never happened. But nevertheless, the whole area was designated as a fortress, and you can still see remains within the city walls of shell shelters where they used to store shells for a battery of heavy guns that were in the Dane John Gardens. So this was a remarkable piece of history. There was also an underground battle headquarters built quite close to here in the grounds of a suburban villa just off St Martin's Avenue, and that consisted of 2 long tunnels with 3 interconnecting tunnels, and it was designed to be a sort of communications hub and a base for the defence of the Canterbury Fortress. And it still exists apparently, although you can't actually go in there because it's in private property. But the history, the Second World War history, is quite extraordinary. Another reason for this area to be preserved. The last thing really to talk about was probably the Cold War. And now the history of the military occupation of the site goes right back to the Cold War period. Of course, the army were here right up until very recently. During the Cold War, they built a series of observation posts, underground observation posts, and these were manned by the Observer Corps. The Observer Corps had done sterling work during the Second World War. They'd been stationed on the coast, and they'd watched out for signs of German bombers coming over. And during the Cold War, this is in the 1950s, they were designated to observe the effect of nuclear attack. Now, what they did, they built 1,500 underground bunkers all over the country, and there's about 4 or 5 in East Kent. One of them was here in the old park, and it was about 20 feet deep, about 17 feet long, by about 7 feet wide. So it was an underground concrete bunker with measuring instruments, and the whole idea was to measure the extent and the position of the nuclear blast that would probably have taken place, particularly at Manston, the RAF Manston, and Chatham dockyards. So a very grim task, and these guys, there were 3 observers. They were designed to be able to survive for 3 weeks underground during a nuclear attack. And just imagine being stuck underground for that length of time. Quite extraordinary, isn't it? They had food, they had a chemical toilet, they had bunks, they had a generator and a battery, and enough food to last them for about 3 weeks to allow the radiation to clear. But I think it's a very grim reminder, really, of what could have happened, and hopefully will never happen again. So that's really the story of the military history of this area. It is quite a remarkable place, and I think it would be a tragedy if this wonderful area was taken over by unsuitable development. It should be kept as a place for recreation and enjoyment of the people of Canterbury, and I very much hope that the Friends of the Old Park and Chequers Wood are successful in their campaign to make sure it does remain a place of enjoyment, recreation and the preservation of this unique landscape.